The Fairies' Warning. Many, many years ago, there was a farm worker in Sutherland called Duncan Fraser. One autumn, he was asked by the farmer to cut some peat from the moorland. The farmer told Duncan he would find the best peat at the edge of his land, near a little hillock known as the Fairy Mound. So off he set. When he reached the hillock, Duncan got straight to work and had cut several lengths of peat when he heard a woman's voice saying, "Stop that right now! Put that turf back on the roof of my house!" He got the fright of his life as he'd not seen anyone approaching, but sure enough in front of him there stood a woman with long golden hair, all dressed in green. It immediately crossed Duncan's mind that this must be a fairy house, so he quickly put back the turf and said sorry. Everyone knew of the she and how it was unwise to get on the wrong side. He had no intention of finding out what this meant for himself. When Duncan had replaced the peat, he realised that he was alone once more. He's more than a little spooked by what had happened, so he quickly ran back to the farm. When he got there, he told the farmer what had happened and pleaded with him to go to another part of the moor to collect the peat. The farmer laughed at Duncan, saying, "Imagine a big man like you being frightened by tales of fairies." Then he ordered him back straight away to cut the peat. Duncan needed the work, so he did as he was told. When he got to the Fairy Mound, he trembled with fear and looked around for signs of the fair folk, but there was no one in sight. As he began to work, he jumped out of his skin when he heard crows cawing nearby, but then realised it was nothing but a couple of daft birds looking for dinner as the ground became exposed. The more he cut the peat, the more he relaxed, and he got into the rhythm of digging and stacking turf. He wondered if he'd imagined it all in the first place. He returned to the farm happy. He knew he'd done a good day's work. A year passed and autumn came again. On the very day that he'd collected the peat the year before, he left the farm that evening carrying a pail of milk home for his wife. He had to pass the Fairy Mound to get to his cottage, and when he reached it, he realised the weight of the working day lay heavy upon him. Tired, he sat down to rest and soon fell asleep. When Duncan woke up, the moon was high in the sky, and the air was filled with singing and laughter. He looked up and saw a circle of fairies dancing around him, all dressed in green. They took Duncan's hands and gently pulled him into the dance. He soon found himself laughing and dancing with them, and knew a vigour of joy he'd not felt since he was a young man. The party went on all through the night. A cock crowed in the farmyard, and suddenly the fairies rushed towards the mound, dragging Duncan with them. A door opened on its side and shut with a bang as soon as they were all inside. The fairies sat down exhausted, and poor Duncan began to worry what would happen next. He sat as quietly as he could in a corner. He just didn't know what else to do. Then someone tapped his hand. His heart sunk when he saw it was the woman in the green dress who had ordered him to replace the turf a year ago. He was surprised when she smiled kindly at him and said, "Once more the grass has grown over my roof. You may go home, but only if you swear that you'll never say a word to anyone of what you've seen here." Duncan gladly swore an oath of silence and was allowed to leave the mound. He found his pail of milk just outside, right where he'd left it, then ran home as fast as he could. He knew his wife would be worried sick as they'd been out all night. When Duncan got to his cottage, he was shocked. His children were now all grown, and they didn't recognise their dad. His wife just stared at him as though he was a ghost. When he managed to convince her that he was her Duncan, he met with a mixed response. She was happy he was alive, but so angry with him for deserting her all those years ago. It was then that Duncan realised he'd been with the fairies for 7 years. Punishment for not heeding their warning.